Hello, everyone. In our slideshow, we are going to be talking about supporting Pacific Islander learners in the classroom and tying in stuff that we've learned throughout this semester in Education 2400 into this slideshow and presentation. I want to start off by explaining who Pacific Islander learners are. They come from a range of cultures and ethnic backgrounds. Includes Hawaiian, Samoan, Tongan, a bunch more. Even though they're often talked about as a group, it's important to talk about them and remember that there is a lot of diversity in Pacific Islander learners and communities, including differences in language, tradition, and educational experiences. Another key point is that Pacific Islander learners are frequently grouped together with Asian American students. But this is important to remember because grouping them all together can be very misleading. While both groups may be labeled under the same category, their educational outcomes, access to resources, and challenges can be very different. For example, Pacific Islander students often face unique barriers that may not be visible when data is combined. So overall, this slide is really about recognizing both the diversity within Pacific Islander learners and the importance of understanding their experiences separately rather than lumping them all into a broader category. I want to highlight some important aspects of Pacific Islander culture. One of the most significant elements is their deep core values, especially their respect for elders. Elders are seen as a source of wisdom and guidance, and they play a central role in passing down traditions, which are also super important to this culture. There's also a strong connection to the land and the sea, which shapes daily life, identity, and cultural practices. It also shapes where they live a lot because they love that stuff, the land and the sea, and they're very earthy. Hospitality is another key value when welcoming and caring for others is deeply emphasized in terms of expression, and culture is often shared through storytelling, song, and dance. These are not just forms of entertainment for this culture, but important ways of preserving history and teaching younger generations. I think we've all seen the beautiful tattoos that they do. Tattoos can also hold a deep meaning often representing personal milestones, identity, or family heritage. They usually get it after a super important thing happens in their life, like a wedding or a certain age, stuff like that. Food and lifestyle are also closely tied to culture. All cultures, but specifically this one, meals are often communal and may begin with prayer, reflecting the importance of spirituality and togetherness. Lastly, there's a deep respect for nature, including traditional knowledge of the ocean, stars, and environment, which has been passed down over the generations. Moving on to this, Pacific Islanders are about 1.5 times more likely to be the first in their family to attend college compared to the national average, which is pretty crazy. While that's a huge accomplishment, of course, it also means that many of these students don't have a role model. They don't have the same level of guidance or support when navigating college systems like financial aid, course selection, or long-term planning. This connects to why these stats matter. In some regions, Pacific Islander students have lower graduation, which can be influenced by barriers, such as limited access to resources or financial challenges. If they don't have support from their family or if their family doesn't know, it's hard, of course. There are also higher rates of economic hardship in many Pacific Islander communities, which can make it way more difficult for these students to stay in school or prioritize their education, especially because they usually become a necessity for their household for income or just caretaking, which can make it more difficult. Another key issue is underrepresentation. Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander students make up one of the smallest shares of college enrollment. So even though they're super hardworking and pursue higher education, they will not be represented in proportion to their population, which highlights the need for more support and awareness.
Challenges in the classroom. Language barriers for some students, stereotyping or invisibility in schools, lack of cultural representation in curriculum, pressure between home culture and school expectations. Strengths Pacific Islander students bring. Strengths and assets. strong family and community connections, respect for elders and authority, emphasis on cooperation, collectivism, rich oral storytelling traditions, cultural pride, and resilience. Interview. One of our group members, Gavin, actually was able to interview someone that falls under what we're studying, and this is just super cool and super interesting. So the interview. In a personal interview with a student from American Samoa, we learned about a first-hand experience growing up in a Samoan school and then transitioning to a public high school in Arizona. Key takeaways of Samoan schooling. Outside of the state's curriculum is not up to date. Education is highly valued in community and family. Teachers are undertrained. Key takeaways of transition to U.S. schools. Lack of support for new students, more isolated experience, expected to be writing at grade level, although some writing skills were not taught back home. Policy issues. Equality alone is not enough. Equity in providing students with the necessary resources to make each individual student of any race successful should be an educational standard. Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans are often grouped into one category when discussing policy, which ultimately fails to address the key differences between the two.
Okay, so first, let me just say thank you to all my group members for working so hard on this and communicating really effectively. It's been a pleasure. So I'll just jump over here and talk to kind of about the class connection, the social life of the student, and why implementing policies that support them is important. So first, I think that teachers need to be intentional about involving those students of all races, really, who feel isolated because they're different from the majority of the class. Um, and that will increase both the cultural competence of both teacher and students, and then prepare students to go out into the world that is very diverse. Um, so, kind of in chapter 8, we talk about we learned about how important it is to create a multicultural classroom and how instituting those policies that builds those students up doesn't just benefit them, but it benefits every student because it teaches them how to communicate and interact with those that are different from them. Um, and right now, I feel like there's only policies in place for Pacific Islanders specifically. There's only policies in place that make access to education equal. Now there needs to be protections that support them. Um, and then another thing is like language barriers might be a big isolator, and I don't think it's expected that a teacher learns multiple languages, especially if they have a highly diverse classroom. But they have to make the best effort that they can to learn the dialect and the nuances, and in return, from learning those from the student, teach the English slang and proper English too terms in return. Moving on. So, some court cases that were pretty influential in Pacific Islanders becoming a part of the U.S. education system. Um, Affirmative action was the most recent one. That was in 2023, and the Supreme Court ruled that affirmative action, which is like the practice of considering race in like especially the college applications. Um, there was a group that believed that it was violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is what the Supreme Court ruled in favor of. And there was also a group that was against it because they thought that maybe doing that, not allowing race to be considered, would whitewash the student body. And then it would also pit Pacific Islanders against students of other color for those limited seats. The thought is that there will be limited seats if we stop considering race. Um, so it's kind of just one of those things that you can see both sides of the argument, and how it plays out is how it plays out. And if it plays out negatively, then we can go back and fix it. That's the beauty of the justice system. And then there was Tate versus Hurley, which kind of just decided, this was back in 1885. This is before Brown versus Board, but ultimately decided that in San Francisco, Asian American and Pacific Islanders could not be excluded from public schools because of their race or language, which also kind of does set some precedent for Brown versus Board. Um, but yeah, this Chinese girl spoke Chinese. School didn't want to let her in, and ultimately it was that she was a good student and she wasn't a troublemaker, so there was no reason to deny her entry. And then there's also Lau versus Nichols. Oh, excuse me. Which established that schools have to support non-English speaking students and like offer those accommodations, because what was happening is the students were allowed to come to school, but they were getting the exact same instruction as every other student, even if they didn't speak English. So the group pretty much argued that the school wasn't intentionally discriminating, but they were discriminating because what happens is the students that can't understand English ultimately get locked out of education. And then some policies that need to just be instituted to better the situation is that we need to increase funding for culture and language programs, which kind of follows what Lau and Nichols does. It needs to be more designed to support Pacific Islanders. And like Talia said earlier, Pacific Islanders and Asian Americans get grouped up a lot, and they're honestly very different. So it needs to be designed to support them. And then we also just need to provide more educational opportunities for teachers to become more culturally competent. Um, and I'm not saying that teachers should go to everything, but if they know they're getting a student in their class who's from somewhere else, then the training for that should be offered. So here's the learning and development connection, which really just talks about like the student individually as a learner and how they grow. And so I think it's important to note that all those court cases and policies really just lay the foundation and the groundwork for educating the students. It gives them the opportunity. They're not always that equitable, but students need to recognize that they are valuable. They bring a value and experience to the classroom that many others don't. And once they learn to be comfortable and embrace that, and it doesn't just take them, it takes the class itself. And so the teacher has to be really involved in educating about other cultures, but the student has to be comfortable and embrace their own culture and their surrounding environment at the same time. Because if they only embrace their culture and they really stick hard, I'm not saying don't embrace their values, but if they do it to the extent that they think they're better, then that leads to some ethnocentrism, which and from both the student and teacher, because one's going to be adamant that they need to assimilate, and the other's going to be adamant that they don't need to change at all. And what really needs to happen is somewhere in the middle. Both of them need to grow. Race is really just an important part of identity, which is something we learned about early in this class. And the cultural values that Pacific Islanders hold on to are usually full of respect, pride, and a strong ability to communicate. So once we recognize those strengths and play to them as teachers, then we're going to have elite students. And that pretty much sums up what I'm talking about.
Hey everybody. To begin, I would first like to thank the rest of my teammates for the effort that they put in and for the introduction and going over all the information that they did. They did a fantastic job. Next, I would like to step into the information that I researched throughout the project. So I wanted to go over systemic racism within the classroom, as well as religious impact, or specifically indigenous religion and ethnobiodiversity. And then to wrap up, I'll go over an activity that we came up with for you guys to go through. It does have a link at the end of the video, and we'll get into how to go over that and just a couple of other ideas that we came up with of how to implement this information into the classroom. All right, so to begin, we have systemic racism in the classroom. So I mostly wanted to go over this because of an interview that I conducted with an individual that is a Pacific Islander. He went over a couple of things that are included on here, and I just felt like it was an important factor to include since it is a constant issue throughout educational programs. So to begin, I would like to say the first thing that we see here, increase in mental health instability resulting in lower academic engagement. Each of these categories are pretty self-explanatory. Acts of systemic racism within the classroom can have an outward effect on a student's life. It can also have an academic effect. The clear up until college preparation level, it can have an effect on a student's SAT scores, their GPA levels, affecting their potential for the future, their grades for the future. Aggregated data, charts, and reports. This is specific to a teacher's ability to record information or to document information. If you are creating data and reports that are aggregated, it means to be discriminatory, which can lead to further discrimination and unequal opportunity within the classroom environment. All right, to move on, we have some examples of systemic racism within the classroom. Curriculum and cultural biases. This is information or curriculum lesson plans that are centered towards a specific group of people or non-inclusive to other groups of people. Lowered funding, expectations, and feedback. This is something that would be an agency's or an educational program's responsibility to resolve. Disproportionate or unwarranted discipline is something that the teacher would be implementing onto students. If a student does one action and gets dismissed, but then a student that is a Pacific Islander heritage or culture would get disciplined for it. Discriminatory dress code or policies. This is something that can be within the classroom or as the school as a whole, just implementing policies that refrain students from practicing their culture. All right, to move on, ethnobiodiversity is an intricate connection between biological and cultural diversity. This term was actually first made to define the relationship or to define the significance that Pacific Islanders bring to our culture in the US. So it focuses on the incredible impact that traditional knowledge has on Indigenous communities and likewise intermingled society. So this knowledge that they have of the surrounding area, the connection that they have to nature, is actually a long-lasting knowledge, and it's very beneficial, as we're seeing in studies towards climate change and global warming. So moving on is the Indigenous religion. There's many different religions that are encompassed in this now. I mean, Christianity is among them. But Indigenous religion overall focuses on a strong spirituality and connection to Earth. So that connection is implemented and carried through their lives as individuals and as a whole. They believe that spirituality is in all people, plants, and animals, and it means that it cannot be neglected. It's something that must be considered within the classroom. All right, so to move on, this is the last thing that I'll go over with you. So we created an interactive quiz. The link to this quiz will be included at the end of the video as well, but I wanted to go over the next, just how to go over it, the next step. So when you click into it, you'll need to go into presenter view, and here you'll be able to click here to start. It'll take you through the question, select the word matching this definition. If I were to collect or click the wrong answer, it would shoot me to here. I go back. If I click the right answer, it takes me to the correct answer. So go through that quiz. Thank you so much.